Welcome to Geared for Growth. This week we're chatting with Marty Sadlier, who is a co-founder and director of MCG Quantity Surveyors, so he happens to be my business partner. Now, I wasn't going to get him on the show for that reason, but Marty has such a breadth of experience that I thought that was a little bit of a waste. So Marty is a quantity surveyor and construction cost estimating expert, so we have a chat to him about milestone payments with building contracts, where contracts and work with builders can go wrong and escalate into expert witness. We talk about strata sinking funds and replacement cost estimates for insurances. So it's a great interview. Marty's got a wealth of knowledge on those topics, and I hope you enjoy. Cheers. Marty Sadlier, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So, full disclosure, Marty, you are my business partner. We happen to be in the same office at the moment, but so the listeners get a background of you. So, who are you and what do you do?
Yeah, so look, I guess I'm a quantity surveyor, and I tend to do more of the traditional side of things with quantity surveying, with cost estimation and those sort of things. I'm a father. I've got a couple of kids that are at school, so we're into that phase of our lives. So yeah, I think I'm prior to fatherhood and quantity surveying, I was building, so I spent a lot of time on building sites, and I think that helps when it comes to being rounded in something. You can sort of, you've been on both sides of the fence, so to speak, from a physical sense on sites to then an office-based type role, analysing and looking at things that you would have ordinarily in the past been erecting or working on.
Yep. Now, a little bit of dirt on the real Marty Sadlier. What were the posters on your bedroom wall as a youngster?
Yeah, look, I shared I'm a twin actually. I've got a twin sister, so I would have shared a room with my sister for the first couple of years. And then she got promoted to her own bedroom and I then shared with my older brother.
Right.
So I think early on we probably were sharing, maybe Voltron or Astro Boy or Care Bears or something posters. But right. Then when I think it became a little bit more manly, it would have been adolescence. It was probably in excess, or that was probably my brother. I was probably more Roxette or something. So and probably a couple of Australian cricketers, probably Bernie, Dean Jones, or some of the real legends of moustache wearing.
And one could run incredibly well between wickets. The other is alleged never to have run at all.
Yes. Yeah.
So how did you first get started in property, and what was your first investment?
So getting started into property was, we invested in Thornton in New South Wales, and I guess it's probably slightly uneducated to a certain degree in it that we bought looking for a place to live. We'd been renting in the area for some time. So probably the smart thing we did was we wanted to live in the area, so we rented for a few years. We rented for about 4 years, 2 houses, a couple of 100 metres from each other, and then bought a house about 50 metres or thereabouts from our second house that we were renting. So we knew the area. I think that was probably the only thing that was in our favour in regards to, because when we first bought, we weren't looking at it from an investor's sort of point of view, and it was before I'd really gained the knowledge on property. It was when I was sort of still on the tools building and just wanted to get a family home. But I guess the advice we sort of took from some friends at the time was, rent in the area and to see if you even like it. And
yep.
And that really worked for us, and that property was our principal place of residence for some time. And it I think that's where we got started, and maybe we've been lucky with that, but certainly knew what we wanted because we experienced the area.
Yep. And I think it's been a pretty good investment for you. For those that don't know, I guess it's sort of somewhere between sort of Newcastle and Maitland, heading out towards the wineries, the Hunter Valley, and you've done pretty well out of that.
Yeah, we have. I mean, when we actually bought it, the agents and a little bit of data that were going around at the time was indicating that in the next sort of 5 years, between 5 and 10 years, the area would be expecting about a 20% growth, and
wow.
I don't think we've necessarily achieved that. We've had that property longer than that sort of 5-10 year mark, but it's certainly fairly close. It would be in the high teens certainly. So it has been a good investment for us.
Awesome. Now let's get into the nuts and bolts of what you do. I guess for a while I kind of thought, I won't get Marty on the podcast because I didn't want to be that sort of greasy, self-promoting sort of thing. So we won't be getting anyone. We won't be sort of hammering anyone with any sort of sales about our business or what we do. But I thought it crazy not to get you on as a guest just because of the expertise that you've got. I mean, you're a accredited expert witness with the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, and there's not many of those in Australia. Member of the Australian Institute of Quantity Surveyors and Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, and you've got a big, long background in everything from shop fitting to building to, of course, quantity surveying. So, how did you actually become a quantity surveyor?
Yeah, I was building. I was playing football, and I in Sydney, and I had a few injuries, and I noticed that I was more sort of sitting at the bottom of the ladder holding it for someone than being on the top with a nail gun a lot of times because of just injuries and those sort of things. And then as I then finished my apprenticeship and was lucky enough that I was in about my fourth year or third year, I was leading hand for the particular company that I was working for. And then when I sort of finished my apprenticeship, I was almost like a foreman for those sites, and then the sort of side promotion to that was, we're a bit short-staffed in the office, can you help with some estimating or contracts admin and those sort of things, and double checking some tenders coming in from subcontractors. And so my role sort of started to move away from swinging an S-wing on site and wearing a nail belt to sort of shuffling papers anyway. And it was a fairly good mix because I could do some of that paperwork, still go out on site, walk around, help out, jump in when needed. And I think that was just my organisation why I was in those positions, because there were guys on the site that were certainly more experienced than me and knew a lot more about building, but maybe at the time weren't thinking of 3 hours down the line or the next day down the line, like looking across and going, oh, you know what, that sand's getting a bit low, we're going to need to order some more sand. So I think it was maybe just some of my the sort of logistics of looking at things and going, you know what, we're going to need that, and looking ahead. And so I think that's what sort of got me moved into more of an organisation and an organisation of trades as opposed to just working on the site. And then I really took an interest to it. I started to get involved in pricing up some of our quotes for works, like for decks and cottage rebuilds and those sort of things. And I really had an interest in that, I guess. And I wanted to progress a little bit further in regards to learning, so I decided to go to uni. I didn't go straight to uni from school. I did my apprenticeship, and I sort of had a little bit of a thirst for knowledge back then and wanted to do something else. So I did my Bachelor of Construction Management and then started working while I was at uni with a quantity surveying company. And so then started, like most quantity surveyors at the start of their career, just being an estimator, getting in there and ripping the quantums and off the plans and marking them up, and really just enjoyed it. I love being able to get a big set of plans and put some music on and work through it.
And I guess 7 years ago you were unfortunate enough to bump into myself and have the crazy idea to start MCG, and that brings us to today. With cost planning, or I should say quantity surveying, I guess there's a little bit more sort of education amongst property investors that quantity surveyors do tax depreciation. I guess it's a little bit more of a heavily marketed sort of thing, but tax depreciation is a relatively new service for quantity surveyors. So what is it that you do?
Yeah, look, and I think tax depreciation is probably on the lips of people because it's potentially the last service that you would get from a quantity surveyor on a property. The job's built and it's now rented. Whereas when we go back to the very start on a job, the quantity surveying is seeing whether these drawings, from a feasibility point of view, can even be built for a certain budget. So what we do, I guess, some people liken us to the accountants of the building world, the bean counters of bricks and studs and noggins. I guess when we look at the big picture of things, we're more of a consultant in regards to costs. So we have investors or developers that are looking at wanting to buy a block of land or an old house and they want to knock it down and want to build something. They don't even know whether they're going to be able to afford this, whether they're going to have to get money from a bank, or what that sort of number is going to be. So that's where a quantity surveyor can help with that. So we would measure up, and it could be a drawing almost drawn on the back of a serviette, because they haven't really wanted to go and spend money on getting full design drawings done by an architect.
Yep.
And in the same token, we do a lot of work with architects, because a client will go to an architect and say, "This is my home I want. I have a budget of $1 million. Can you please draw me something, design me something to that budget?"
Yep.
So an architect's doesn't want to go back to that client and have got their hopes up and shown them this wonderful design that's going to cost 1.5 and they just can't do it. So we get a lot of architects will send through drawings and say, "Can you please give us a budget on this?"
Yep.
And that's both of those services are at the start of a job. There hasn't been a digger on site or a bit of Rio mesh put down yet. It's all in regards to, let's cost our design to see how much it's going to cost, and if we can't afford that, do we have to go to a bank or get some sort of a loan, or we need to save more, or let's redesign it to get it down under budget.
Yep. And I guess there's different types of reports depending on what they're trying to achieve, or how sophisticated or far down the line in that development process they are.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you were looking at wanting to get a cost plan done on a property that was pretty well now finalised in design, and you wanted to be comparing some builders' pricing that was coming in, depending on how you're going to get that builders' pricing coming in, you may want some more meat on the bones. So we would do more of a detailed cost plan where we would be counting toilets and taps and how many actual square metres of wall tiles and floor tiles and carpet. So they can really see where the money is in that budget. Now, if it is an organised tender, that there is a compliance in regards to how it has to be submitted, the builder might have to break up certain costs against certain trades. That's a much easier apples and apples comparison when you've got a detailed cost plan done from a quantity surveyor in the same breakup. But if you're getting a lump sum from a builder that says, I'm going to build this house for $2 million for you, you're none the wiser to know where that $2 million is. Is it in the ground? Is it the roof? Is it the specialised glazing that's going in? So by being able to break up that $2 million into what it is going to cost for those individual trades can help you make some more rational decisions later on in regards to what you may need to compromise on or not.
And that's a process that you run through with the architects as well, right? Because an architect might build you your dream home, and then you realise, well, if we change one or two elements, we can adjust the cost by hundreds of thousands of dollars, perhaps.
Yeah, exactly. And a simple one, maybe just glazing, that there might be 400 square metres of glazing in this big house, and that doesn't want to change because of light and those sort of things. But we can sort of say, well, yeah, but of that 400 square metres of glazing, you've got 30 or 40 square metres of bifold doors that are much more expensive than, say, doing some sliding doors or some couple of fixed panels and a swing door or what it might be. And so there can be a bit of a reconfiguring of even just the exact same square metres of glazing, but different types in different areas.
Yep. Now, you mentioned banks before, and I know that banks are one of your sort of biggest clients. Which banks are you working with, and what is it that they engage you to do?
Yeah, so we work with quite a few banks of various sizes. So I guess when you look at the big banks, we do a lot of work with Westpac and St George in New South Wales, and then when you go to Victoria, there's a bit of a mix there where we also do the Bank of Melbourne and Westpac and St George, and we've done reports for ANZ, and so when we talk about a panel QS or a panel quantity surveyor, a bank will have a panel of quantity surveyors that I guess they have vetted that suits their criteria, and so a developer may go to a bank and say, I need to get a quantity surveyors done, who's on your panel, and vice versa. A bank might say you need to use a QS, these are the guys that are on our panel.
Yep.
So predominantly they're the banks that we're working with on the large scale, and then on the smaller scale there are smaller sort of Agility Finance and Australian Securities Limited, and these smaller patent finance and those sort of things that we do just as much work with, and they're just a little bit more boutique.
Yep. And typically, what are they getting you to do for the projects?
So from a bank's point of view, they want to make sure that what they're lending for the property is what the property will be built for. So they don't want to fund a job that isn't going to get the job to completion, and that's a risk mitigation. They don't want to fund $500,000 on a property that's going to cost $1 million to build, because if something goes wrong, there's not enough money to get the job finished up.
Right.
So they're wanting to make sure that what the criteria that the developer or the client wants, that the funds are there in pre-approved buckets, so to speak, to get the job finished. And then it goes a bit further in regards to a bank also wants a quantity surveyor to check the plans that there's enough accuracy in them in terms of detail. They're not just the plans that are sketched on the back of the survey, and provide commentary on that, and provide commentary on a builder's resume. Has he done these sort of jobs before? Has the developer done these jobs before?
Yep.
It might be good and well that a developer is coming to a bank and saying, I've got 30 years of experience in building. I've always built shopping centres, and now I want to build residential towers. There's a bit of a difference there.
Yep.
You're using different trades, different methodologies. So the big thing there is they're looking at getting the quantity surveyor to be their eyes and ears on the documentation that they have thus far, and provide their opinion on that.
Yep.
And then if it goes through to progress claims and monitoring of funds when it comes to payment for builders' works, also looking at the insurances are up to date, mandatory inspections are being completed, and the costs that are being claimed for works being done are relevant to the works that have been requested for payment.
So I guess you'll do your sort of initial checks on the builder themselves and make sure that you're recommending that they're able to complete that project, and of course complete that project for what they think is a reasonable sum, which you'd sort of double check. And then, as you mentioned, progress claims. So when I guess the development has been given the green light, the banks don't want to sort of just say, here's your $10 million, good luck with that, because people tend to sort of buy Ferraris and go to non-extraditional countries, I guess. So
yes.
How do those sort of progress claims work, and how do they differ from, say, a residential contract where, let's say, you get a GJ Gardner or one of those types, and they issue sort of, you pay them based on milestones? What's the difference there?
Yeah, so I guess there's a couple of parts to that, and that is that there are three main players in that process at that point. There is the funder, there's the developer, and the builder. Now, in its simplest form, there's going to be a couple of different contracts signed here. There's going to be a construction contract signed between the developer and the builder, which is going to be the contract or the Bible for the build. With the specification of what the quality of the finishes and those things are going to be. And that's what's going to control the site in regards to timings of things and that sort of stuff, and that would break out a payment plan, whether it be the builder is going to claim on the 25th of the month, and if there's a late payment, there's a certain percentage that's owed to them, and that they're going to be paid for materials fixed to site, or they're going to be paid under a milestone or a staged method.
Yep.
And the other side to that is that there would be a contract signed between the developer and the bank or the funder, financier, and that is the financial agreement of the loan criteria in terms of money. So what interest rate that person's going to be paying for the borrowing of this particular sum of money.
Yeah.
Now, the issue is that the fine prints on those contracts don't necessarily line up. So in a lot of cases, the agreement that developer signs with the builder is going to be for, in that instance, a milestone. So when he finishes base stage, so when he's got all his slabs down, and then the next stage would be frame stage, so when he's got all his timber frames up. Now, the issue that you would have there is that the problem is, though, that the developer is relying on funds coming from another party, so a bank, and that agreement that has been signed is that the bank is going to pass funds to the developer for materials fixed to site. So you instantly have a bit of an issue there where the money that the developer is getting hold of is only for work sort of being done to site, whereas a builder has signed a contract with the developer saying it's on a staged process. Now, that's going to have been including a deposit, so that there's 5% that's already been paid to a builder and no work has been done on the site. Now, there's not to say that money isn't being spent wisely. It would be making sure insurances are in place and site fencing and establishment's been done, and paying for deposits for long lead items, windows, and etc. So, but when it comes time to payment, there's nothing actually done there, so the bank isn't going to want to give that sort of money over. So they use quantity surveyors to help track that and provide opinions on how that is best managed. It doesn't always go smoothly, but as long as you get all the parties in a room and explain the process, I think people are a little more comfortable with it.
Yep. And I was going to ask some of the typical issues that you sort of come across with progress claims. Obviously, if a builder's saying I spent $200,000 on windows, but they haven't been arrived and fixed to site, there's going to be a discrepancy with the funds available and that sort of thing. With sort of residential investors and builders in mind, have you got any sort of advice on how they can structure their contracts around those milestones and maybe some of the cheeky things that builders do to sort of front load the expenses there, and just any important comments that you might have on liquidated damages and time delays and how those sorts of things are managed?
Yeah, I think you've got to go to the table with an open mind and put multiple hats on, whether you're the developer or the builder. Just see where the other side's coming from. So early in a contract, a builder's going to propose a staged payment plan, so base stage, frame stage. Now, he's going to front load that, as you said before. Now, it's not that he's doing anything untoward at all, it's that he's not the bank. So he knows that he's going to have to. So he might have 20% for base stage, which on $1 million contract, that's not going to be the total amount of concrete that's required on the site. It's going to seem that he's claiming a lot more for the value of works that's being done. But he's also getting some extra money there so that he can put deposits on long lead items and pay for those windows to be getting manufactured off site, because he's going to have to pay for those before they come to site.
So there's nothing typically wrong with that in essence, and as long as your bank's sort of happy with those milestones, they're going to pay the money anyway?
Well, they may not pay the money anyway. They may pay only for materials fixed to site, and it may be that the developer's got to meet that shortfall. And that's why it's important to understand how that's broken up. And I think a developer should be, if he was using a quantity surveyor at the start, can have a look at the time of contract signing and saying, we don't really think that 20% is a fair amount for base stage. I think it should be closer to 15, and the real cost might actually be 10%. But there's been a bit of a compromise there that we're giving you 15, we're also giving you a bit of float there for the long lead items, and you already have a 5% deposit, so that should see you in those early stages in good standing, as opposed to it being 20% plus the 5% for the deposit it comes down to exposure, and I guess the bank is looking at it that, well, we're funding this job, and if we're going to pay out 25% on a milestone and the building works stop and they don't get past base stage and a relationship breaks down, there's not enough money left to finish the job.
Right.
Because we've already paid out 25% of the cost, and we've only actually got on site 10% of that. So a developer needs to understand why that's in place, and I think where you tend to get more of the issues is when all three parties are on their own in regards to an understanding on that. So the bank is quite clear on why they're releasing money in that way. A developer's just wanting the builder to get paid and just wants to be able to get his money when he wants it, or she wants it, and the builder is just wanting to get paid as per the contract, otherwise he or she is going to go and build another job somewhere else. But if you all get on the same page as how this money is going to come and the timings of that, people can work through it fairly well.
And obviously that doesn't always go terribly well, and you do a lot of expert witness, so there'll be a solicitor or a barrister that's engaging you as an expert on a development project from a costing point of view and a programming point of view. Typically, what goes wrong, and what's your role in that side of things?
I think a lot of it's communication. Some of these builds are going for over a year, and certainly big sort of residential unit developments are longer than that, and people get tired, and communication breaks down, and in a lot of cases when I do expert witness, you meet up with the parties and they were almost best friends for 3/4 of the build, but towards the end there are stresses in life that change, and you're also then in bed with the bank for quite a lot from a developer's point of view with quite a lot of money, or if you're the builder, you could be owed quite a lot of money, and when you're getting towards the end, there's just that increase in stress, and the communication tends to slow up a little bit because everyone's a bit busy, and the problem is it comes down to one party feeling that they've either paid too much or one party feeling they haven't been paid enough, and sometimes the straw that breaks the camel's back in that regard is the really small one, and it may be over something that is a small thing like the quality of a driveway or the quality of a paint finish in a room, and it all just breaks down. So what we try and do in that instance is get them in a room and say, come on, look, it's no good for anyone at this point. If the builder leaves site or the developer wants the builder gone, it's going to cost a lot more money to fix this up, and if you're the builder, you're going to miss out on some profit and those sort of things. So we try and get people to work through it. It's better if the person that starts the job finishes it, just with sign-offs of services and those sort of things.
Yep.
But it comes down to, in a lot of cases, just trust seems to wane a little bit between the two parties, and sometimes it's just some people are either of those parties are a bit worried about being completely honest, and I think if people were more honest in a lot of those situations, it wouldn't escalate. And an example of that would be that a builder's going slow on site and he's starting to really slow up, and a developer would be saying, come on, what's going on? Like, we're meant to be finished in a month and we've still got heaps to go, what's going on? And the builder would be like, oh yeah, it's all right, it's just been a bit rough, the weather or what have you, and it's not. But if the builder potentially said, you know what, I've got another job down the road and it's hit a real problem at the moment and I'm using a lot of my resources on there just to get it through, that the developer may not be happy with that, but it's more of an honest answer as opposed to a builder saying, yeah, no, everything's okay, and the developer drives past and there's no one on site again today, and he just feels like there's not that honesty there, and trust starts to come in, and I think we've probably all been in situations of when you lose trust in something, you start looking for things, and I think sometimes you start seeing things that aren't there, or they're blown out of proportion.
Yep.
So I think it's, if there's a little bit more honesty there between those parties, and I think people, especially developers now, are very busy people outside of this particular build that they're on, and that they come past in that fleeting moment and something's not where they think it can be, and they think the worst. And I think we've all seen social media and phone and internet and updates of builders going bust and this and that. So people start to get wary and worried, and then put pressure on each other. And whereas I think maybe if you're going to do some of these big developments, keep that line of communication open and have a monthly meeting or a fortnightly meeting, and keep that sort of good communication open of where things are, and maybe not come down with a ton of bricks on being a couple of days behind on something, but make it known that why is that, and get the correct reason.
I guess that's sagely advice, but human beings being human beings, you're still going to have plenty of work with those sort of broken communication lines.
And that's what people have to understand, is that a builder is a human being that has the life pressures outside of your house that he's building, like anyone else. He has kids at schools and this, and same as the developer, they have the same sort of pressures. And money is sometimes, even though you've got approval, it can sometimes be slow, and someone thinks they're not getting paid because the person doesn't want to pay them, but it just could be in the background there's a bit of an error with some paperwork. I think you just sometimes got to be clear on that.
So for sort of your average residential investor or small scale developer, they might have some exposure to quantity surveyors for renovations, whether it being just sort of costing those up or new builds. And I know that quantity surveyors are called upon in New South Wales to assess the value of improvements. What's your role there, and how might people come across a quantity surveyor like yourself?
Yeah, so in New South Wales, a lot of the sort of mandatory that a quantity surveyor needs to sign off on the construction costs through the Section 94 developer contribution. So that's when a developer is looking at doing a development. There are going to be future residents or people that are going to be moving into that, whether it be a house or units. Now, there needs to be money put aside to pay for infrastructure work such as roads and footpaths, and making sure there's parks and community services in and around these developments. So you have to pay a contribution, a developer contribution, which is the Section 94. So what was happening early on is a developer didn't want to have to pay that large fee. So they would say, well, our development's only going to cost $500,000, even though it might have been a $2 million build, because their fee was less. So councils were sort of missing out on these monies that they could be using for updating roads and curbs and putting parks in and this infrastructure. So they made it a mandatory thing that quantity surveyors would need to sign off on the construction cost of this development. So it just made it more of a fairer playing field. So we go in and assess what the construction costs will be. We'll fill in a council form. Every council typically has the same sort of format. It's very similar. Some have some slight sort of tweaks, and we'll fill in that form as well as giving a detailed cost plan of what the costs are going to be, and then they can work out their council contributions off that. Now that's before you've even got development approval. So we're going back to where we were talking before about at the very start of a job, when you've got a developer and an architect that are still sort of sketching stuff on plans. That's when a quantity surveyor is being used. That's not the same across the country. It's not the same in all the states. So mandatory, it's New South Wales. There's a few councils in Victoria that are starting to get behind that and see the merit in that. So hopefully that's just a point in time that Victoria sort of follows suit on that, and Queensland. Yeah.
And property investors that own strata-titled properties may have had exposure to someone like yourself, but perhaps not even known it because it was sort of engaged through the strata manager or the owner's corporation. But you do a lot of work with sinking fund estimates. Can you tell us more about your role in those?
Yeah, so the role that the quantity surveyor is playing there, or we're playing there, is that there will be a sinking fund with that unit entitlement, and that's to replace materials and items once they've reached their lifespan. So it might be a balustrade. So the balustrade is deemed common property on this particular development, and it's a glass balustrade. It's going to have a lifespan. So the lifespan of that balustrade in the current environment that it is, because it's near a marine environment or not, let's say it's 25 years for the replacement of that balustrade. What you don't want as an owner of that unit block is that one day that 25-year mark comes around and it's $100,000 to replace all the balustrades in the development, and you've got to chuck your hand in your pocket for your share of that. So the idea is that monies are getting put away each year for that event when it comes up. So we'll go in and do a sinking fund forecast where we go and quantify and cost all those common items, and it would be things like carpet and tiles and paint in common lobbies and hallways, or your balcony works if they're common with the balustrades, the roof if it's a common roof, and the guttering and downpipes. And we'll put a price on each of those items and quantify how many linear metres or square metres of each of those are, and then give an indication of what we believe that lifespan to be. So if it was a downpipe, we might say that it's got a 30-year lifespan and it would need to be replaced, and when it in 30 years, and when it does, it's going to be a certain number, $30 a linear metre to replace.
Yep.
So then what people can go, okay, that's going to cost $30,000, that all those downpipes in 30 years, let's start putting money away for it now. So I guess in its simplest form, if it was 30 years and it's going to cost 30 grand, they've got to put $1,000 away a year, and of that $1,000 there are 5 units, they've all got their own different unit entitlement, and they'll break up that share of that money per year.
Yep.
There's obviously it's not necessarily as simple as that math formula we just spoke about, because there are also cost escalation. So what the gutter might cost, or the downpipe might cost $1,000 now, but in 5 years' time it might be $1,200. So we have to add some escalations to that as well. But primarily what we're doing is we're saying these are the items that are going to need replacement. These are the years it's going to need to be replaced, or we're forecasting it's going to need to be replaced. This is the money it's going to cost. This is what you should be putting away now. So when that event happens, you've got the money sitting there.
Yep. I guess that's a form of insurance for the building in a way. So you're planning that things will break over time, and you have that money sort of set aside. Another sort of service I know you do is replacement cost estimate. So that's when, let's say your house is burnt down, or you've had flood damage, or what have you. Obviously we're not sort of chipping into our pockets each week just to calculate a percentage so we can rebuild after a certain time. We sort of outsource that to insurance companies. So how is it that you help investors with getting those insurances right?
Yeah, so residential investors, it's a bit harder. They tend to be a little bit more cost sensitive. They've already, paying their property managers, and they're already putting some money away for hot water services, and all those sort of things, and they don't want to spend too much money on it. And so we tend to do a lot of insurance replacement estimates on commercial developments. But the reasoning and the importance of it is just the same. So when looking at a residential house, we're saying to people, you need to replace your house, to rebuild your house is going to cost you X. But that shouldn't be what you go and insure your property for, because there's a lot more to just what the cost to rebuild your house is when it comes to insurance. And so what we do up a replacement cost report, and we'll identify what the replacement cost of that house is. But then we also cost in some other items and say, well, if it's going to burn down or it's going to be flood damaged, no one has clicked their fingers and your house has just totally disappeared and you're starting fresh on your build like you were potentially when you first built. You're going to have some cost to remediate the site, to demolish the existing and start again. So we put some money in for that. And then you're going to have the costs of site work, so the retaining walls and the gardens and all these extra things that you've been bolting on over the years, you're going to need to replace. It's not just the house. And then you're going to have the cost escalations that go along with that. So if we're saying that you're going to replace your house today and it's going to cost X amount, it's going to take a few months for the assessment to be done by the insurance company, and another few months to get your house drawn up with an architect and get it through development and planning approvals, and then another month or so for a couple of builders to go through the tender process and give you a price, and maybe a few weeks or a month for a quantity surveyor to be costing that up and double check that. And so suddenly we're at sort of 9 or 10 months before we've even started to rebuild yet. So when we're talking about what the replacement cost be, we should be looking at, well, we're not even going to start building for another year. We've got to make sure we're putting some cost escalation on what it's going to cost then to rebuild next year. And then there are some other sort of design sort of things that you need to allow for, and then even that, just be wary that if your house burns down, you're going to need to live somewhere. Now you just got to be a bit more mindful of it, not just let's click our fingers and rebuild this house that we've currently got.
Now, I know that most people would probably opt to come up with a figure that's given to them by the insurance company or using their online calculators. Are those figures factored in, and if so, is it accurate enough to use those calculators?
No, the calculators are very broad, and they're meant to be a supportive tool. They're meant to give you a bit of an overview. You'd really need to get it costed. So, because the thing is that a cost calculator isn't going to take into account that you have a sloping site and you need to have a 40 linear metre by 4 metre high retaining wall at the back. And it's not going to be able to just say that what size pool you've got, or that you've got a half basketball court down the bottom. So when you're looking at the costs of homes, you might have very high-end finishes in your particular home. It may be a weatherboard home looking from the front, and you've been able to select on a cost calculator weatherboard 3-bedroom home, but you may have quite extensive fittings inside, and light fittings or technology with C-buses and those sort of things, which aren't going to relate to a 4-bedroom weatherboard home, a single story in a cost calculator. So if it's quite a simple home, there still could be differences. It's not going into whether it's peed or on a slab or whatever it might be. So we always say, spend the couple of dollars. It's a big investment that you've got. You're quite prepared to buy a home that's $500,000 or more, but not spend a couple of $100 on getting a cost plan done for insurance.
Yep. And I guess the negative side is that if something happened, you might find yourself exposed and having to cover a shortfall. On the other side of things, you might have to pay a higher premium, but that's because I guess you were underinsured in the first place, right?
Yeah, and then you hear the horror stories of the figure you had was 80% of what the actual cost was, so therefore what the insurance payment's going to be is 80% of that value, and suddenly you're shorter again on your replacement cost and those sort of things. So it's just important to spend the time at the start, as much as it is, like go and get a building and pest inspection done. The same should be said for if you're going to have a property and you're going to live in it or you're going to rent it. Make sure you've got the coverage there for it.
Yep. And what is it that you enjoy most about being a quantity surveyor, Marty, if there is anything at all?
I think it. I take it back to when I was building. I think what sort of gets my juices going is the tangible thing. I like to see something physically. I like to build something and see the end result. So with quantity surveying, I may not be swinging a hammer anymore, but I'm seeing a set of plans come across my desk that are at sketch level, and we've costed that up, and that has meant that everyone was happy, and they're now going to progress to a builder, and then we do a more detailed cost plan, and we then compare 3 builders' pricing, and lo and behold, a builder is selected and signed up, and the developer then goes away to the financier and says, I'm going to need to get some money to build this. And the financier says, well, let's get the QS to do his checks. And next thing you know, we're now working with the builder to make sure he's got his insurances in place and the construction certificate or the building permit's been granted. So suddenly, we're now at a point where someone's going to actually knock the tree over or dig a hole on site. So we get out to site and works begin, and we then start going out there once a month or more frequently and assessing what's being done, and the builder's getting paid, and then there might be a bit of a hiccup, and we're able to help out either party to get that sorted, and suddenly there's a house built, and suddenly there's occupation, and the bank's been paid out, and they're great and they're happy, and we now do a depreciation schedule because the developer has now rented it. And we've seen this come from a set of plans that were pretty simple, where they didn't even know what they wanted, what roof was going to be built of. We were sort of making assumptions at the start, to going in and doing an inspection with tenant's furniture in there someone's living.
Yeah.
So the beauty about that for me is I get to see something go from start to finish, whereas there are a lot of jobs out there that you never see the product, you never get to feel the product or never get to see it evolve or grow or change, and the little things that pop up that you need solving along the way are just those little challenges that every job's different then, and I think that's what I enjoy about it.
Yeah, and I've enjoyed sort of looking at some of the photos of your progress claims and doing some of the inspections on your behalf to see, a block of dirt turn into something rather fantastic. So yeah, it's interesting. A lot of people don't get to see that. You just sort of find the end product and buy it. But yeah, you've got that sort of behind the scenes, inside look at how it all comes together. So
yeah, and someone will see a wall and say, well, that's a nice wall, and I'll see that wall and go, yeah, but I can remember 6 months ago that to do that there was a major issue and there was this and that, and the wall means so much more. Yeah. And that's hard to explain to people.
Yeah. So Marty, if people have got some questions for you or wanted to have a chat about anything estimating related, how do they get in touch with you?
Yeah, look, without getting too sales pitchy, just jump on the website. My details are on there, and so if you get on the MCG QS website, all our details are there, emails and phone numbers. And for the cost of an email or the cost of a phone call, it's a pretty cheap chat, and I'm always up for one. So
and your phone calls are free too, right?
Yeah, they can we're not charging for that, and I spend most of my days on the phone to people that are just wanting to pick the brain and have a chat about stuff, and we'll end up winning the job or working with them on other developments or that development. And it all started from, hey, if I was building a house, like what should I be looking at or what have you, and it's just getting around people that are like-minded or have a little bit more knowledge in certain areas and helping you out.
Awesome. Now, Marty, just before you go, if there's one piece of advice you could impart to property investors, what would that be?
I love these questions because being born in the 70s and a product of 80s ads, whenever I get asked this question, I always go back to the Pizza Hut ads with Dougie delivering the pizzas, be good to your mother. But I think from a quantity surveying point of view is just know your numbers. I think it's the same as if you're going to go and buy a car. You walk in and you get a price on a car, and more than likely you'll jump on the computer and you'll double check that against somewhere else or other car selling websites or other dealerships or what have you, and you shop around and you play against each other and what have you. The same has to be said about property, that if you're going to do a bathroom renovation, and you don't just ring up someone and the first price you get is what you go with. Know your numbers, know what the breakup is, and if someone's not prepared to give you the breakup of it, for me, they're probably not the person to use. If I want to build a house, I don't want to build it to say it's going to be $200,000. I want to know where, because if it increases for whatever reason with a variation later on, how do you know what that variation is? Because it was never itemised. They don't have to provide a full bill of quantities, but just know your numbers, know what you're investing in.
Awesome advice. Be good to your mother and know your numbers. Love your work, Marty.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming on Geared for Growth.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Cheers.